So the Washington Commanders are looking to trade Brian Robinson Jr., and the whole situation could reveal a potential clash between established players and the new front office's philosophy that could have reaches beyond the two players that it's affecting. That and more right now on Locked On Commanders.
You are Locked On Commanders, your daily podcast on the Washington Commanders. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
This is Locked On Commanders. I am David Harrison, your guy on the ground covering the Washington Commanders for WUSA 9, and here with you 5 days a week. You can also find me writing about the Commanders for Sports Illustrated's CommanderGameDay.com. Follow me on X at DHarrison82, and I thank you for coming through for today's episode of Locked On Commanders. Special thank you goes out to all the everydayers, those of you who come through for every single episode. And if you haven't already, please subscribe for free on YouTube or wherever you're listening to today's show. If it's your first time coming through, welcome to the program. Hopefully you like what you get and you come back for more here real soon. Today we're going to open up the mailbag. We're going to discuss football terminology and roster depth, but we're going to start it all off with two names getting a whole lot of airtime and no snaps. Wide receiver Terry McLaurin and running back Brian Robinson Jr. All of that coming up on today's episode of Locked On Commanders, a proud part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And it is a mailbag day. No practice on Tuesday, so I opened up the mailbag. Let the insiders send me their questions, the topics that they want to hear as Commanders fans, and we're going to dive right into them, starting off with the situation surrounding Brian Robinson Jr. and Terry McLaurin. Both situations certainly different in their very significant contextual ways. However, also both of them similar, at least to the public eye and potentially to the perception of the individual players. So trading Brian Robinson Jr. is more than about just the Commanders seeing what they can get for him. It's a message that the front office is sending to the entire locker room. And truthfully, it's a message that was already sent a year ago when they traded Jahan Dotson, first-round draft pick, first-round wide receiver. They traded Jahan Dotson. Not only did they trade Jahan Dotson, they traded him inside the division. Why? Because the personality, the person was not a match for the organization. We've heard it time and time and time again. When you hear the Washington Commanders, whether it's Adam Peters, whether it's Lance Newmark, the assistant general manager, the head coach Dan Quinn, a position coach, a coordinator, whoever it is you hear talking from a position of power, a position of decision-making ability, what do you hear them say? It is about the man. It is about the why you're doing this. It is more about that than it is anything else. Bottom line is everybody in the National Football League is talented. Yes, there's varying levels of talent, and I think certainly the more talented you are, I think the league has proven just by and large, the more talented you are, the more people are willing to kind of put up with your crap. When you're not super talented, when you're not this unique unicorn type of player or super critical to the team's success, they're going to be a little bit less willing. And how that applies here to Brian Robinson Jr., how it applies to Terry McLaurin is very simply the front office establishing this environment, culture, whatever you want to call it, where they say, listen, at the end of the day, we're going to do what's best for the team. Like, let's remember who's in charge here. The players, as much control as a player always wants to have. At the end of the day, the franchise is in control because nothing happens until the franchise says, yes, we're going to do this. The player can say yes. The franchise says no. It does not matter. The player can say no. The franchise says yes, it could still happen because there is not a soul that I have met that believes that if Adam Peters and the Washington Commanders look at Terry McLaurin and say, look, dude, we're not trading you. We're not paying you any more than we've already offered you. So sit out the year or come to work. Nobody believes Terry McLaurin's not going to come to work. So at the end of the day, the player can say no, the team can say yes, and the answer is yes. That's just kind of how this works. Whether it's right or wrong, that's for future CBAs to discuss. But the environment we have in 2025, that is how this works. And that is the message that the front office is sending to this team, is either get with the program or the program is not going to get with you. All right. Now, questions in the mailbag. We had Insider Thomas, Dr. Wonderful, Ricky and Seth and Richard all come out with questions that are similar to these topics. Thomas wants to know, both Terry McLaurin and Brian Robinson Jr. situations, are there risks that players are starting to view management negatively for being quote unquote too secretive or for potential personality conflicts? Dr. Wonderful wants to know, if BRob is traded or his role is diminished, who gets the majority of the carries, or does this become a running back by committee system? Ricky and Seth asking very similar questions. realistic trade scenarios for Brian Robinson Jr. Could a veteran wide receiver be nabbed in return for BRob? And then Richard wants to know the latest on Terry McLaurin, if and when we will see T-Mac. Wow. I don't even know why I was going to go there. When we will see Scary Terry back on the practice field. So let's start with the overarching theme here from Thomas's question, the quote unquote business side of this new regime. And I will tell you right now, it's like I just said, if you're a part of the program, if you get with the program, this isn't going to bother you because this is what it's all about. Look, Bobby Wagner negotiated his own contract, didn't have any problems here. Adam Peters is using the same algorithmic evaluations, using the same staff to scout, using all these other things. Bobby Wagner is his own agent, so he's in there negotiating with AP directly, getting a very fair deal, right? Even in a world where Javon Kinlaw's contract was ripped to shreds saying, hey, Adam Peters doesn't know what he's doing. He's paying Javon Kinlaw way too much money. And if you're an everydayer, you already know, I've told you, I've shown you that not only are they not paying Javon Kinlaw too much money, they can cut him after this season and save money in the process if they want to do it. So not a bad contract at all. Zach Ertz, been around the block a few times, won a Super Bowl. He comes back on a new one-year deal. No worries, no issues, no drama, right? There are more indications here to show you that this front office negotiates in good faith. They negotiate fairly. They negotiate privately. Jeremy Reeves, his extension, nobody knew it was coming. Sam Cosmi, his extension, nobody knew it was coming. Percy Butler, his extension, nobody knew it was coming. Trust me, there are more of those examples than there are these examples. Why does it feel like on the outside to the media and to fans that these examples are more heavily weighed? Because these are the ones that get talked about the most. That's just the way that the nature of the business. They also prolong the most. Like if we heard in July that the Commanders were working on an extension for Sam Cosmi and the extension comes through in September, trust me, from July to September, we're going to be asking for updates. We're going to be asking Sam, his teammates. We're going to be asking everybody. But guess what? That stuff doesn't get handled. The good stuff doesn't get handled in the court of public opinion. It's the bad stuff that gets out there. That's why it feels heavier. But trust me, there are way more good deals happening within those walls than there are bad ones. Moving on to Dr. Wonderful, the running back room. Is Austin Eckler the clear lead back? No, I don't think that he is. And I know for a fact, we go back to Austin Eckler's own comments when he joined Washington. Why did he leave Los Angeles? Los Angeles wanted a bell cow running back. He said, I'm not a bell cow. I need to be part of a 1-2 punch. That has not changed. Austin Eckler is not going to be a quote unquote lead back. He's going to be part of a lead duo. Is that going to be Chris Rodriguez Jr.? Is that going to be Ja'Cory Croskey-Merritt? I think, listen, if one of those guys emerges as a guy who needs to be that bell cow for this offense, then certainly it can become that. But listen, I've already been, and I haven't done my 53-man roster prediction yet, but I've already been on the fence about whether or not I'm going to keep 4 backs on the active roster or 3 backs on the active roster. I'm going to give you a little spoiler alert. I'm keeping 4 as of right now, unless something dramatic changes from now till after Saturday, or after Saturday's game when I do my official 53-man roster prediction. I'm keeping 4 running backs on this roster, and it's going to be just in order from oldest to youngest. That's how we're going to do this. Austin Eckler, Jeremy McNichols, Chris Rodriguez Jr., and Ja'Cory Croskey-Merritt. And you know what? I'm going to keep Demetric Felton on the practice squad. We're not going to actually build a practice squad, but I like what he brings to the table, so we're going to keep Demetric Felton on the practice squad. So that's how I think this is going to happen. I think it's going to be rotational, situational football. Which running back in this situation, this formation, down distance, this opponent gives us the best chance to be successful? That is the running back you'll see on the field. That's the way I see it coming right now. But again, this is all very new, so we're getting new information on a daily basis. Ricky and Seth wants to know about Brian Robinson's trade value. Honestly, guys, it's a day 3 pick for me. I think 5th round is like the overpaying ceiling. Most likely a 6th rounder, maybe even a 7th. That's a conditional pick. Could be a 6th. As far as getting receivers back, I did a little bit of research, looked around the league at guys who could use running backs, and honestly, the best deal I could find of that's most likely, because remember, you're talking about the equivalent of a day 3 pick here, the Dallas Cowboys. And again, I know a lot of Commanders fans be really upset to see the Washington Commanders trade another player, another starting role player for the Washington Commanders offense to a division rival again. But Brian Robinson Jr., the Dallas Cowboys could certainly use some more running help. Jalen Tolbert is on the last year of his rookie deal, and I think that he's a guy that could potentially come in and thrive in Cliff Kingsbury's system. Another option, Sky Moore, Kansas City Chiefs, very similar type of situation to the Dallas Cowboys as far as the fits are concerned. Either way, you're facing Brian Robinson Jr. as an opponent if you trade him to either of those teams. Real quick, Richard, Terry McLaurin, as far as like when will he be back at practice? No hard information on that. But if he's not back at practice Wednesday or Thursday, at least on the side working out with trainers and doing those types of things, it's going to raise some eyebrows. The fact that he wasn't at the game has already raised some eyebrows. If you want to call it one eyebrow raised, If he's not out there Wednesday or Thursday at all, it's going to raise even more. So we'll see how that all comes in. Coming up next, we're going to talk about roster depth and guys on the bubble and rookies who have already cemented their spot on the active roster as far as I'm concerned. That's next on today's episode of Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. This episode is presented by Yahoo Fantasy. It's the best time of the year. NFL kickoff is almost here, and that means fantasy football season is back in full swing. We just spent time debating the Commanders' running back situation and future roster spots. Those are the conversations that win you fantasy leagues. And this year, we're playing on Yahoo Fantasy, and you should too. I've used Yahoo for years. One of my new favorite features is the Guillotine League they just dropped. So you should join it too, whether it's your first league or your millionth league. To celebrate 28 years of fantasy football greatness, Yahoo Fantasy is dropping 28 big new features over 28 days through August. And to kick it off, they dropped that Yahoo Fantasy Guillotine League that I just referenced, a killer new way to play Yahoo or play fantasy football on Yahoo, where the lowest scoring team gets eliminated every single week until there's only one left standing. Of course, if you like the more traditional ways of playing fantasy football, they have that as well. So with the season right around the corner, now's the time to get your league together and give this new mode a try, or just give the classics a try. Stay tuned for more killer announcements and start playing Yahoo Fantasy Football now at yahoofantasy.com/LockedOnNFL. Forget the theory that the team is hiding Luke McCaffrey, because the snap count reveals a much more alarming problem for the second-year receiver. Moving on from star players to now the depth chart and guys potentially on the bubble, deeper into the depth chart. Do the Commanders have enough quality depth to compete, and which players are on the bubble or making a strong case for a roster spot? Those are the questions that are coming to us from insiders Merle, Michael, Hamadou, and Ricky. Merle wants to know, looking at the whole roster, does Washington have enough to be a Super Bowl contender or just a playoff team? And should they go after veteran free agents like Justin Simmons? Michael wants to know if rookie running back Ja'Cory Croskey-Merritt and wide receiver Jalen Lane have to do anything further to prove that they deserve a spot on the final roster, which is actually the initial 53-man roster. And Hamadou wants to know, says we were introduced to John Bates, the tight ends blocking on Monday night. Yeah, in a big way. But how are he and Ben Sinnott faring as pass catchers? And Ricky wants to know what's going on with second-year wide receiver Luke McCaffrey's lack of production. Very good question from all of you. We're going to start here with Merle and talk about the depth. So the strengths of the depth, right? And it's going to be weird to kind of say this, but wide receiver, kind of a strength in depth when you look at it on paper. Terry McLaurin, Deebo Samuel, Noah Brown, Jalen Lane, Luke McCaffrey, Michael Gallup, KJ Osborne, Ja'Cory Brooks is making plays, right? Like there's a lot of good wide receivers. What there's not is a lot of great wide receivers, right? Like you don't have the top end talent of, say, an AJ Brown or Devontae Smith, at least not yet, right? Terry McLaurin, Deebo Samuel, I think could be one of the most lethal wide receiver duos in the National Football League this year. We just haven't seen them. And obviously it's because of one player or more than the other. Noah Brown hasn't been able to stay healthy. My heart goes out to him, but he hasn't been able to stay healthy. Hasn't been able to get back on the practice field here in training camp. It's great to have him on paper, but you have him physically out there, much more important, obviously, than just having him on a roster spot, right? So wide receiver depth is kind of weird that way, where like there's good depth, but then there's also not great depth. And we'll get to some of that here in just a little bit with Luke McCaffrey. Defensive line, I like the depth on the defensive line. I think they got a lot of rotational pieces. They got a lot of guys who can play up and down the line. You got D tackles who can play, on further out towards the edge. You got edge guys that can come down inside and reduce and play inside. Even Dietrich Wise, if you saw Dietrich in his appearance on the show shortly after he was signed by the team, he even mentioned, hey, I'll play zero. I'll play straight up, nose up, over the center, kind of tongue in cheek, right? But he said, he'll do whatever you need him to do. But then you have some other areas, O-line depth. Look, when we started this thing, I really liked the O-line depth. But then Nate Herbig retired. And guys are getting injured. Guys are getting banged up. You know what I mean? Brandon Coleman's not out there. They bring in George Fant. The veteran offensive tackle. I think that's kind of a signal of like Brandon Coleman's health and, whether or not Sam Cosmi is going to be able to come back as soon as Dan Quinn had kind of speculated he might be able to. So, I still like the O-line depth, to be honest with you, but I'm a little bit less in love with it than I was. And then that's what injuries do to people. That's what injuries do to units is they thin them out. Speaking of thinning them out, linebacker group would be a lot more confident in the linebacker group if Jordan McGee was back on the field. Dominic Hampton didn't pan out. Tyler Owens is still a project in development. I still think he's more of a safety than he is any type of a box guy. Kay Medrano looks like a stud, right? I mean, he's not perfect by any means, definitely a rookie, but he looks great for where they were able to draft him. But, you're basically three deep at the linebacker position now with Bobby Wagner, Frankie Louvu, and Kane Madrano. Jacob Martin on the outside is definitely not roaming the middle of the field in pass coverage reliably anytime soon. Safety, I kind of go back and forth here. Quan Martin, Will Harris, Jeremy Reeves, really like those guys. Tyler Owens, I still believe in his upside, whenever we can get him there. Percy Butler, I still question the physicality, whether or not he really truly fits with the overall motif of the defense, but clearly he makes enough plays on special teams. He does enough on defense that they like him. However, if Revo is going to be the third safety, then obviously, Percy's not that third safety, which is what he was last year. So now you're looking at Percy become that fourth safety. So we'll see where that kind of goes. And then with Murrow, should you go after Justin Simmons? No, because if you go after Justin Simmons, he's not coming in trying to be the fourth safety behind Jeremy Reeves and Will Harris. He's coming in here trying to be the first or the second safety. And I think first, second, and third, you're good. It's the guys behind them that, if I have question marks, that's where they come from. So I wouldn't go there necessarily. And then as far as Michael asked with the two day 3 draft picks, Ja'Cory Croskey-Merritt and Jalen Lane, I don't think they have to do anything, Michael. I think that they both have earned their roster spots. I think they've both proven their value to the team. And Ja'Cory Croskey-Merritt came in with a lot of excitement and hype from the outside. Obviously, the inside, they were a little bit more excited about him than they led on, although they always say they're in love with all their draft picks, but still even a little bit more than that. Preseason performances have been pretty solid, right? He was solid in the joint practice against the Patriots. Solid, one of the bright spots of a really down day in the game against the Patriots. And then obviously Monday night, he had that big touchdown run, had some other good plays as well as looked really good. And when he was up there with the top, upper echelon of the offensive linemen and all that stuff, he was certainly doing better than when they got to the kind of the deeper part of the offensive line into the evening there on Monday night. Jalen Lane, man, I mean, just talk about a guy who is accelerated beyond everyone's expectations. Punt returner, certainly, but he comes into a very top-heavy wide receiver room. Luke McCaffrey was having like an off-season or a preseason for the ages, and just like, okay, Jalen will return punts, will probably be wide receiver like 5 or something like this year, and we'll see what happens next year. But now, I mean, as it is today, I mean, he's wide receiver 2, right? Like with the guys that have been on the field, Deebo Samuel, then it's Jalen Lane. Like Terry's not out there, Noah's not out there. I think Jalen is certainly ahead of Luke McCaffrey. Hat tip to Jalen Lane and what they got going on out there in Blacksburg. Virginia Tech might be a school that people need to scout a little bit heavier moving into the future. Moving on to the tight end room and Hamadou's question. I think you hit the nail right on the head there, man. John Bates and Ben Sinnott as blockers certainly showcase some of that talent yesterday. I think with John Bates, we kind of have seen what he is as a receiver, which is very solid, average, great blocker. Again, arguably the best blocking tight end in the National Football League and an average receiver. You can live with that. You can love that as your number 2 tight end all day long. Ben Sinnott, good blocker, good physical player, where we haven't really seen him take that step, where we haven't really seen him make plays and flash and showcase his stuff, is in the passing game. And yeah, that needs to get seen sooner or later. I expect Ben Sinnott to play Saturday against the Baltimore Ravens. And that's going to be another opportunity for him to go out there and potentially make some plays. But as of right now, he looks like a really good blocking tight end and maybe an H-back type of guy, like maybe a true Kyle Juszczyk type of player. The problem is, there's not really a role for a Kyle Juszczyk in a Cliff Kingsbury offense for the most part. So, we'll see what happens with him. But I think you hit the nail right on the head is they do need to see more out of Ben Sinnott as a passing game contributor than just a blocker moving forward. But John Bates, I think, is pretty much solid where he is. He's the number 2 guy. He's going to be a number 2 guy. And you can make a lot of money, have a lot of success doing that as well. Finally, finishes off with Ricky's question about Luke McCaffrey. Yeah, they're absolutely not hiding Luke McCaffrey. In fact, in Monday night's preseason game against the Bengals, Luke McCaffrey played the most snaps of any wide receiver on the roster. 28 offensive snaps, more than any other wide receiver. Didn't receive a single target. Now, I looked into his tape. I watched the 22, broke down every rep that Luke McCaffrey had, every pass route that he went out there and ran. And what I'll tell you is, he won some routes. He certainly didn't win other routes. The thing that's more alarming to me, less than is Luke McCaffrey winning. Look, Luke McCaffrey's never been a separation genius, but there are reps where he specifically got over the top of the defense. He was literally all by himself running into the deep part of the field. There was a couple of inside breaking routes that he won. There was a couple of hitch routes that he won and would have been wide open for targets. The thing that bothers me more than anything else is that in none of those reps did his quarterback, whether it was Josh Johnson or Sam Hartman, even look at him. Like they weren't even looking at him. That's the more troubling thing for me, because when quarterbacks are not just straight up not looking at a receiver, to me, it looks very much like they just don't believe in him. Like they just don't trust him. And again, and I want to make sure I'm clear on this. I don't know that that's the case. Like Sam Hartman, Josh Johnson, Tavita Pritchard, nobody has told me these quarterbacks don't trust Luke McCaffrey. But if you're just reading the tea leaves, guy gets 28 snaps out there. He runs like 13, 14 routes on Monday night. And I watched every single one of them. And even when the quarterback's looking to his side of the field in their progression, doesn't look like they're looking at Luke McCaffrey for anything. Just out there doing cardio, man. Just out there running up and down the field. It's got to be frustrating for Luke. The weird thing about it, and this is why, and I've had some fans tell me, like, the practice reports don't match what we see on the preseason field, because in the practice we're getting told Luke McCaffrey's open for this. Luke McCaffrey's making this catch. The difference is those catches are coming usually from Jaden. So are they hiding him that way? Whereas like, hey, we know Luke and Jaden have this really great connection. We're just not going to put him on the preseason field. And then boom, when the season starts, Luke McCaffrey's going to explode because he and Jaden have this great rapport. I mean, okay, maybe. I don't think so. Coming up next, we're going to talk about some terms that we use quite often on this show. Coming up next on today's episode of Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode of Locked On Commanders brought to you by Game Time. Have you ever decided at the last minute to head to a ball game? Maybe it's game day and you suddenly realize you need to be in the stands. You need to be where the action is. That's exactly where Game Time comes in. It's the easiest way to grab last minute tickets without the stress. And as we get ready for the Commanders season to kick off, there's nothing like seeing the team live. I'm already looking forward to the home opener, and Game Time is going to make buying tickets for that game fast and simple. If you want to join me at Northwest Stadium, prices on the Game Time app actually drop the closer you get to kickoff, and they've got incredible seat views right in the app before you buy, so you know exactly what you're getting before you make your purchase. So take the guesswork out of buying those tickets on Game Time. Games, shows, comedy, theater, anything you want. Download the Game Time app. Go find your tickets. Create your account. Use the code LOCKEDONNFL to get $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create your account and redeem the code LOCKEDONNFL. That's LOCKEDON NFL for $20 off. Download the Game Time app today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. The term nickel is thrown around a lot on this show, on probably a lot of NFL shows, and constantly when we're talking about defenses, we use some of these terminologies, some of this terminology, and we've got some insiders who came through and said, they would love a little bit of explanation of what some of these terms mean. So as we go through these mailbag episodes, part of it is going to be, this, and some of you know this, and if you know it, use it as confirmation that you already knew it and you're good. If you don't know it, you're not alone, and we want everybody to understand as best as possible. But when we're in the process of the show, we can't always stop to break down what every single term means. So got a couple here from an insider we're going to start with. Basically explain the basics of what 4-3 and like 3-4 and all that stuff really mean. We're also going to talk about the nickel position and the nickel defense, what those things mean as well. So starting off with a 4-3, right? We talk about a 4-3 base defense. First and foremost, a base defense is essentially the quote-unquote standard defense. Like if everything was standard operating procedure, this is the defense that this team uses. Call it the platform. It's basically the personnel alignment that the defense forms all of their other alignments and all their other game plan features off of. So 4-3 refers to 4 down defensive linemen, usually 2 D tackles, 1 defensive end, 3 linebackers. That's only 7 players. So you've got 4 more players remaining, which gives you 4 defensive backs, typically 2 safeties and 2 cornerbacks. 3-4 would just be the inverse of that. The first number, however, is always referred to the down lineman. The second number always refers to the linebackers, at least in the basic defensive formations. There are some other looks out there, but you've got 3-3-5, things like that as well. 2 down linemen have become a very popular thing here lately in the NFL. But typically, if you hear about a team using a base defense of whatever it is, the first number refers to the amount of down linemen. The second number refers to the amount of linebackers. And again, there are some other variations, but without taking an entire day, their episode to explain all the defensive formations, that's kind of the basics of it when you hear those things. And of course, then you hear about the nickel defense. The nickel defense is largely considered a sub package, a substitute package. Basically, when the offense comes out in a package that's not your standard, 2 receivers, all that stuff type of formation, then you have to sub one of those players. Either if you're in a 4-3, you're subbing one of those linebackers out for a defensive back. So now you're in a 4-2-5. If you're in a 3-4, you're subbing out one of those linebackers. Now you're in a 3-3-6. And that's where those numbers come in. And typically you refer to these as nickel packages. Your nickel is your fifth defensive back. That's where the nickel comes from, right? Nickel is 5 cents. Fifth defensive back, like the 5 cent nickel. That's where the term comes from. And your nickel back is that fifth defensive back that comes on the field. Typically, you're bringing him on the field to cover a slot receiver who's being added to the offensive formation. Therefore, your nickel back is typically your slot defender. Now, some defenses, they have their primary two corners, and when they go to a nickel defense, one of their primary corners actually moves inside, and they have another corner that comes out to play outside. That can certainly happen as well, although not as common. That's essentially what nickel comes from. And then when you go beyond that dime, it's not 10 defensive backs, obviously, but it's just another additional defensive back added to that. And then you're just going up one, there's no denomination of coin between 5 and 10. So your next denomination would be a dime. That's where you come up with that. So a little bit of explanation there, terminology. I'll tell you what, anybody out there, if you're really interested in like the root and the meaning of defensive formations, offensive formations, the history of them, I highly, highly, highly recommend reading the book Blood, Sweat, and Chalk. It's an older book, right? It's a little bit dated. It's not like none of the information is bad. It's just not quite as up to date, right, as it would be like today. But really good information in there. It dives into formations. It dives into usage. It also dives into the history of it. I'm a big football nerd, so I actually got done listening to it. Coincidentally, this question really mirrors up with having listened to that book just recently. I'm an Audible guy. So I listened to that book. Really great stuff if you really want to get into the nuts and bolts of football organizations and formations and things like that. So hopefully I explained that in a way that everybody can understand it. Hopefully you learned something, or you at least confirmed something that you already knew. Either way, great mailbag episode as always from the insiders here. And we'll do it again real soon. That's going to do it for today's episode. Next time on Locked On Commanders, we will have more practice notes and observations, potentially updates on Brian Robinson Jr. and Terry McLaurin. In the meantime, if you've got questions for future mailbag episodes, you can text them to me directly by becoming a Locked On Commanders insider at joinsubtext.com/Locked On Commanders. NFL fantasy draft season is here. So for your second listen, go check out the Locked On Fantasy Football podcast. Listen every day to prep for your fantasy draft so you can win your league's championship. Find Locked On Fantasy Football on YouTube or wherever you're listening to today's episode. To the everydayers, I see you every day. I appreciate you every day. And a special thank you goes out to you today for coming through for today's episode. Till next time, stay safe, be kind to one another. We'll talk again real soon right here on Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.